Drum solo.
Oh, yeah.
Here we go. Hello, and welcome to Homicide Life on Repeat, the show where we rewatch, we recap, and we relive arguably the greatest television show of all time, Homicide Life on the Street. My name is Reed Diamond. I played Detective Mike Kellerman, and I am joined, as always, by my friend and my partner, Federal Way, Washington's favorite son, Kyle Secor, who played Detective Tim Bayless.
Federal Way, representing for Federal Way.
Dude, are you the most famous person to ever come out of Federal Way,
No,
Washington?
absolutely
Okay,
not.
Yeah.
I actually believe Apollo Ono. We've had like a couple of Olympians come out of Federal Way for some interesting reason. I have no what.
You're obviously the most famous TV personality.
Non-speed skater.
Non-speed skater. Oh my gosh. Well, Kyle, here we are. We're on episode 104, Son of a Gun.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
Would you like to tell the audience who our guest is today?
Oh, yeah. Our guest is Nick Gomez, and he was a guy who had done some independent films with a bunch of his college buddies, and one of them called Laws of Gravity. It was seminal for a lot of us, which strangely enough I never saw until about 3 nights ago, but it was seminal.
Better late than never.
Yeah. And they brought him down after not having done anything.
Well, I'm very excited to talk to Nick about this because, yes, as you said, seminal, he was at the vanguard. He heralded in a new wave, the next wave of independent cinema in the 90s, which we're going to get into in depth. And I, too, Laws of Gravity was iconic for me, and I don't think I saw it until yesterday. But Son of a Gun, written by the great scribe, James Yoshimura.
His first script on the show.
His first script on the show, and he was, we affectionately know him as Yash.
Jimmy or Yash.
Oh, Yash. Oh, did you say Jimmy?
Yeah, Jimmy.
Jimmy.
Yeah,
yeah.
Or Yash.
Oh, Yash.
Yeah.
There's a cast member who will go unnamed, but one day he said, I'm going to go kill Yash. And he meant it. It was a full-on homicide on homicide. It was averted, but we'll get into that season 5 or 6. I'm looking forward to that. Yash, he was a big playwright, and I just read something which it could be apocryphal, could be true, that Tom and Yash became friends. They met at some mutual friends party in Los Angeles, and Yash was pontificating about the theater, and Tom said, you're one of those theater snobs. you think you're better than television. And then they formed a fast friendship.
Well, you know, what Tom had said to me is he said
the
reason that Yash and I have remained friends all this time is he and I are so opposite. Tom is he's the writer's writer, and Yash is like a force of nature who bleeds. He bleeds writing. Tom doesn't do that. He has just a completely different way of approaching it. But Yash was that tortured writer.
Clark referred to him as the Dylan Thomas type, where he has to go through this painful birth of a 17-pound baby. I met him for the first time, actually, prior to the show. He was a playwright in residence at Juilliard.
Oh.
When I was there, I think Andre had just graduated, but in the third year, your junior year at Juilliard, your class has to create a play, and they bring in a playwright to help facilitate that, and then you take it on a tour of New York City public schools.
Oh.
And Yash was brought in to write the play for the third year. All I remember of him was him moodily smoking cigarettes in the hallway, leaning on a locker. When you could do that back in the late 80s, early 90s, you could smoke in the hallways of Juilliard. And he's just there, just ruminating. And
I do love the idea of Yash writing a touring play for high schools.
Oh, yeah.
What was the play? What was it? We're going to the high schools, kid.
We're going to the high schools. The best part about the third year tour of the New York City public schools, which I had attended as a youth, is that while you were at the academy, while you were in the ivory tower of Juilliard, people could get very to the point of where their own poop didn't stink. And they would have very emotional moments. And they forgot that what we do, what you and I are trying to do, our motto, don't bore us, get to the chorus, part of what we do as entertainers and actors is entertain. If you are performing in front of 3,000 12 to 13-year-olds and you're not entertaining, you're having a little private moment, they're going to let you know pretty quick. It was a great gauntlet for young actors to remember that the audience is important. At the time, Juilliard was much more British-centric. It was much more, it sort of denied that all of these acting revolutions had happened in America since the late 40s through the 50s and the 60s.
But we didn't have our own way of doing it here.
We didn't have our own way of doing it.
Bring in the Brits.
It was run by a Brit. It was run by this very authoritarian and sadistic British man who had learned to become a theater director. He had been captured at Dunkirk.
Wait, can you give me a name?
Yeah, Michael Langham was his name.
Excuse me. So I worked with Michael Langham.
Here we go. This is the gold.
Right?
Where did you work with Michael Langham?
You just told me about who he was and what he did. I went, that sounds familiar. In England, at Oxford, he showed up. It was the American Academy of Dramatic Arts through Yale and Oxford. They did a thing together. And I was over there, and they had incredible people come in to, teach classes. And Brian Cox came in. He did master classes. They had a lot of different, Joan Plowright. Amazing time.
So when were you there? How old were you?
I was 5.
You were 5?
I was 5 years old. I was learning early on, dude, in 1988.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and he was there, and it was hellacious, completely. And I really liked the guy, but he made it really difficult.
This is amazing. Kyle, I love you so much, and I'm so glad we're doing this together because the kismet and the synchronicity of this story. So you worked with him in 1988. That was right after he directed Andre in Othello. Nick Gomez, who directed Fire Part 2, I was just rewatching that last night, and I thought of a Langham thing that he taught us in Andre's Othello. We had to be afraid of Othello. And he said on the stage, the actor can't take authority or status. You have to give it to him. By the way we, the supplicants, the spear carriers, by the way we acted to Othello, the audience would know how powerful Othello was.
Right.
And I just watched Fire Part 2 where I'm introduced, and you and Andre gave me status. Because I couldn't take it from you, but you gave it to me in these scenes, which was so generous.
You know what it feels like? It's like you let the other people do, in a way, the heavy lifting. That makes so much sense because then you, who's like Othello or you in that scene, don't have to do everything. Go, I need this from them. No, we're giving it up.
Have to.
I love that.
That's the way it works. But that's so funny that you worked with him, by this very cruel man who had an amazing story, though.
He was
because
cruel.
He got captured at Dunkirk, which was the sort of first battle that the British were in the Second World War.
Yeah,
and then
give that to him.
You give that to him.
We'll give it to him.
We'll give it to him.
Yeah.
And then he got stuck in a German prisoner of war camp for the remainder of the war. And what they had there was a complete Shakespeare. And so he started directing plays in the prisoner of war camp, and that's where he cut his teeth. So it's a beautiful story.
Yeah, it is.
He gave me probably one of the cruelest directions that I've never forgotten, because I think, and I'm going to ask yours after this, but you never forget the cruelest thing said to you. In my 4th year, we did Romeo and Juliet, and I was given the gift of Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet.
Great role for you, my friend.
But according to Michael Langham would always say in the middle of her, stop, you're murdering it. You're murdering the text. You've cut its legs off and it's just dragging bloody stumps across the stage. But he said to me when I played Mercutio, he goes, stop. I want champagne and you're giving me stale beer. Ooh. Yeah.
That's a good one.
And I lay there in bed sometimes in the middle of the night. I'm like, I'd like to do that over again, maybe.
Yeah.
What's the worst direction you ever got?
I was doing a movie of the week with Sharon Gless. I thought it was all going really, really well, and I love the director and everything. And I got a call, and he said, "Hey, I want you to come to the editing room."
Oh God.
And I came in, and he wasn't really looking at me. He said, "Hey, Kyle, come on over here. Sit on down. We'll run that one piece back, and then we'll run that other piece back and the other piece." So I went, "Okay." And he's looking at it, and I'm looking at what's going on, and I'm going, that's not bad. I'm kind of happy with what I'm doing. And he said, "You notice anything?" And I went, can I see that second piece again? And I went, He said, Your mouth. He went, "You're slack-jawed. Your mouth is open. Stop wandering around in scenes with your mouth open like you're in awe of everything.
I had a director on a television movie tell me the exact same thing. What are you doing, catching
Really?
flies? Yes.
Oh
exactly.
my God. He didn't say, "Are you catching flies?" He says, "You just look dumb." Oh, by the way, I have to say this one thing is that I saw Andre before Homicide doing Coriolanus with Christopher Walken.
Christopher Walken.
And I remember Andre specifically because he would walk across the stage and he was in essence a spear carrier.
Yes.
And
New York Shakespeare Festival.
Yeah. And he had this white hat on, a white suit. And I'm looking at him going, holy shit, that guy is incredible. I don't even know if I heard him say any dialogue. He was amazing.
He was amazing. Yeah, he worked his way up there, and he was a star. A classmate of mine was in that production of Coriolanus, and Christopher Walken would have a glass of vodka on either side of the stage, so when he went off onto the side, he could take a drink and then come back.
For his throat.
For his throat, of course. For medicinal purposes only.
Yeah.
Well, I guess, Kyle, we should get ready for our guest.
Good God, man.
The great and
like
powerful Nick Gomez.
Nick Gomez. Did you ever work with him again?
What do we got?
Got a guest for you. What's it for? All for you. That's right. What do we got? Got a guest for you. Who's it for? All for you. All for you.
How many portraits have you received from background
I would say 4.
Yeah.
Really?
So that's like
And were
one.
any of
That's
them
like one every
creepy?
20 years.
Oh my gosh. We are honored and delighted to have with us the great and powerful Nick Gomez. Nick exploded onto the scene with his game-changing movie Laws of Gravity, and I would say that you were at the vanguard of the next wave revolution of independent cinema in the 90s. And this guy went on to direct New Jersey Drive and Ill Town and like pretty much every television show that you should be watching: Oz, Sopranos, The Shield, Dexter, Chicago PD, New Amsterdam. I could go on. And I would say, without hyperbole, I don't think there would be any Homicide life on the street as we know it without Nick Gomez, without Laws of Gravity, and without your input on this show and the cast you brought to it and the DP you brought to it. But enough of my blathering. We are so honored and delighted to welcome the great and powerful Nick Gomez.
Wow. Well, Reed, that was pretty mind-blowing. I'm really bad at taking compliments, so thank you for that. I'm kind of blushing all over right now, so thank you so much. It's so great to see you guys. I mean, it's really been it was great when Kyle, you reached out to me, and then when more or less the same time it came up the show came back on Peacock, and I've been sort of like trying to catch up on certainly like my episodes and the other episodes. I remember I went back and watched the pilot, which was really like the beauty and the grace and the style of the pilot was something I think that I don't know if it gets recognized enough, because it really was a really beautiful, very poetic piece of work that set a tone that wasn't always matched right in the 7 seasons. Because when I first got there, I knew nothing. And I didn't know these actors, and we didn't rehearse, and we didn't have a read-through, and we barely had traditional things like location scouts and tech scouts and all that stuff that's attributed to normal TV now. It was very much like when I talk about a Tom Fontana production, I always just describe it as an Italian kitchen, because there was just all these passions and all these tempers and all these fires either being lit or being put out, and just like lots of different flavor running around all the time. And it was a really very passionate but shaky environment, right, to work on. There was just a lot. Like when I got there, I knew so little, and I was so terrified the whole time that I was kind of overwhelmed, really, just by the sort of like my insecurities about what I was doing, because I had never worked with grown-ups like Tom Fontana and Barry Levinson. I was hanging out with a bunch of kids. I was 28, so I didn't know anything. So to go back to my introduction, right? So I had made a movie called Laws of Gravity, which the point of that movie was to make it look and feel like a documentary. That was my gimmick. That's all I had. I had $35,000, and we were shooting in the real streets of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, where we still had all the charms of street crime and prostitution and drug dealing going on. And I had a cast of unknowns, including Edie Falco and Paul Schulze, who ended up being in my first episode. And so, not knowing anything going into that movie, I rehearsed for a really long time with the actors, for a month. And that's where I just began to learn a little bit about how to listen to them and how to talk to them. And so then finally, by the time we started shooting this film, which we shot in 12 days on 16 millimeter, with Jean de Ségonzac on camera, of course, right? Because I put the word out, who's the best handheld guy for my fake documentary? It was always his name that came back. So I met with him. He instantly got it. And we had devised this way of shooting where he didn't always know what was going on. We would sort of be in the next room with the cast, rehearse it a couple of times, bring him in, he would put the camera on his shoulder. I didn't tell the cast we were rolling. I would say, okay, go. And we'd be shooting the rehearsal. And the freedom and just the sort of the openness of that, eventually we would go on and do a take. And we had a lot of long takes in that movie, a lot of jump cuts and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it was the accidents and the bumping into the camera and trying to find the focus. All of those moments is what made that sort of feel like a documentary. So that was the gimmick. So anyway, so that film comes out and I'm film festivals and all this kind of fun stuff. And then I get a call from my agents and they're sending me a book from a guy, from a bunch of people whose name I didn't recognize except for Barry Levinson. I'm like, oh, I know him, of course. And it was Homicide. Book blew me away, of course. David Simon, what a writer. I'm like, this is great. What are they going to do? What's happening? And my agents were like, listen, be careful. You just did your first feature. You don't want to jump into television too soon. I'm like, no, you're wrong. I want to do television. What are you talking about? So then they put me together with Fontana and Finnerty, an outdoor cafe in Soho. And they're like, listen, we're doing this thing and we want to make it feel like a documentary. What did you guys do for Laws of Gravity? And I said, well, listen, it's easy, man. You get an Aton and you get John de Ségonzac to shoot it, and you don't rent a dolly, and you use just a handful of lights, and you run around, and you don't give the cast marks. You just let them do their thing, and you embrace the accidents and all that kind of stuff. And they were like, oh, okay, thanks. And, hey, listen, anyway, nice to meet you. And then I got a call, whatever, a couple months later, come on down for episode 3. I'm like, yay, this is great. And so then, and I visited the set while they were doing the pilot. I think a lot of people were visiting probably when they were shooting the cemetery because it allowed room for everybody. I think I met David Simon there on that day. And then, so then here I am like on the set of this TV show, not knowing anything because I didn't know anybody. I didn't know how to work with people that I hadn't been working with for a month. And obviously the crew was fantastic. But I was really because the first thing we did was in the coffee room. It was like, it was Belzer and Polito and Baldwin, and Yaphet then comes in, and I didn't know what the fuck to do. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to put the camera over here, and I'm just going to let Wayne just roam until he gets close enough to get something, and then we'll find a first shot. Because I'm not great at pre-visualizing. That's why I really like working on a show like Homicide and other TV shows, because I've gotten better at it, but I kind of like to get to the set and see where the actors fall off the truck. And then okay, well, you went there for a reason. You probably want to go there again, right? Instead of me saying, okay, you're going to walk over here. And it became a challenge later in other episodes where I'm like, gee, it would be fun to do some real blocking where I'm chasing somebody over here and then it passes off to somebody over here and then it passes off to this. And that was a fun thing to do. Has sort of the rules sort of changed a little bit. Because the rules that I had for Laws of Gravity, I could never do anything that was not documentary style. I had one POV shot, which drove me nuts, where I had a character look at something, see something, then cut back to him. Because I felt like that was too manipulative. So I was trying to apply the same rules as much as I could to Homicide, and I realized I couldn't do it. It was too much to ask Wayne to jump around all over the place, because he didn't quite have the same documentary instincts that Jean. Jean could do that. Right, Jean could really, because he was a dance. He loved dance. We had a thing. We would bump into each other at like modern dance performances in the city, and so he thought like that, instinctively like a dancer, and so he was always sort of moving like that. And he had that grace and all that kind of thing. So it was really, and so by the time I got to set and I was working with Wayne, I was kind of like, well, Wayne, you're pretty good, but I got to tell you, I've worked with some masters and what they would do in this situation. And then he got bumpy with me about that. And I didn't really know my role as a director quite yet in the sort of like the paradigm of TV. I've done my own writing. I'm like, there's writers over here now sort of like watching me, and there's actors that are that are like fighting me about stuff. And I didn't understand that as a director on a TV show, I couldn't just take the lines and put them on the back of an envelope and change them, which is what I was used to doing. I remember I gave Andre Brower a bunch of lines when there was a scene when they're rousting a house. And he's like, dude, I'm not saying this stuff. You know what I mean? What are you talking about? I'm like, okay, fine, okay. So I was really, really green, and I really had to find my way sort of through the entire. I mean, I got there eventually, but it was really mind blowing for me that first time, and how little I knew, and how kind of terrified I felt throughout the whole thing, and trying to sort of like adhere to what I understand is my own very limited sort of cinematic principles, because I was always trying to sort of like create a kind of a truth and verisimilitude in everything. And if I felt like the scene didn't carry a bucket load of that truth, I had a lot of trouble understanding it and cutting it up and making it work for me, right? Because if I didn't believe the core essence of what it was trying to do dramatically, then I didn't know how to necessarily sort of shake it and turn it into something real, which was sort of always my goal.
I said in the introduction that I really feel like there's no Homicide without you and without Laws of Gravity, and now you just kind of confirmed that.
You gave us it.
Right.
You
Okay.
gave us
Yeah. Right. You said.
So wait. When you were meeting with Finity and Tom
Yeah.
at that cafe, and they were like, going, like, give us everything that you can tell us about this. Did they say you're gonna come down and do an episode?
No, they wanted.
Was that
I think
implied
was
at all? Or
look, my agent said they're doing a show. They're putting a show together, and they want to talk to you about it. So, and whenever you have a meeting, it's just like casting. It's like, thank you very much, nice to meet you. But I could tell, especially Finity, right? Because Finity always liked me. I always got along with Finity because I was always fast. And in my first meeting with him, I'm like, fucking, no, you don't need a dolly. No, you don't need a gigantic lighting package. No, you don't need to do this.
Oh, he's
of
all over
course
that.
he's all over
Yeah.
that. Right, so he's like, and when I saw him when I went back down there for the pilot, he was like, dude, he was so gracious to me, and he was always like that. He also knew he could see like I was a little bit of like kind of an underdog type, and he kind of like wanted to sort of like support me. He wanted me to be his little cause, So it was so Finity and I always got along. What was the name of his amazing wife? Oh, she was an incredible woman. Yeah. Incredible woman. Really just, I remember I met her a couple times in the office. I'm like, really? You two? Okay. Well, good for you, Jimmy, because she's, wow, what an angel.
They were so in love.
Yeah.
And her family came from this shipping empire. Like they rented sailboats, and then she was yachting.
Because he was a boater too, wasn't he?
Together.
Wasn't he a?
Yeah, he used to go
boater
deep sea fishing.
gangster.
Well, he was of that old school. All those guys in New York were gangsters. I mean, all in the old film industry, like TV in the old days, the '70s, the Kojaks, all the Teamsters, they called them the gun unit at the time. The Westies were all mixed up with that whole bunch during all that kind of time. He's part of that whole scene. So anyway, sorry, Kyle.
Jim, famously kept a gun in his desk.
I saw it. Yeah.
It was.
Well, yeah,
you did.
Everyone had to know it was there. How else are you going to effectively produce it with a bunch of knuckleheads in Baltimore?
So when you got the script of Homicide, did you go, oh, what do I do with this? Or did you have specific...
Because in those days, you're not seeing like cuts of other stuff, right? So I'm like looking at so I'm reading the other scripts. The thing that I learned is because when we landed together, Kyle, you were in the fever of a Dina Watson. Right? You were completely occupied with that. And I was completely outside of that. Right? And so I'm reading what's on the page. And I didn't anticipate sort of like the level of focus and profound energy because you were kind of lost. And that's a really profound place to be in the middle of your story arc. Right? Because like my favorite moment is when there's a little thing when you're like desperately smoking a cigarette and you got a rubric cube in front of you. And Pemberton says something to you. And you kind of look up, you don't have an answer, and we're kind of shooting from behind your head, so there's an opacity about it. We don't really, and which is what I really liked. Instead of getting there with both eyes, it's like saying, shot. "Oh yeah. We don't have access to this guy's turmoil." I didn't have access to that turmoil either, because working with you was a little bit like working with somebody who's sort of on another planet, because you have this ethereal quality as you move through the world. You may not know this or not, but you're just a little bit. Your height helps as well. So there's a little bit where you're kind of like in a, your head is in the clouds. Communicating to you it's either going into some sort of place. You're either assimilating it or you're like, I've got this already. This is the strange kind of like musical quality that you had working with you. Because I remember once there was some line. It was a later episode. I'm like, how the fuck are we going to do this? And you're like, don't worry, I got it. And then, of course, it's the stupidest line, and you just made it sing. Now I understand the art of what these guys really do. Because they sit in their chair in the morning, and they get their lines, and they're often remembering, you guys often were, that was the first time you were, like, really putting them to memory, I think. Right? In the chair, am I right? Mm-hmm. Like, not the night before?
Yeah, it could be, could be. Night before we had a lot we had to do.
Yeah, the night before you guys were working or drinking or whatever. But anyway, you guys were in the chair, and you would come out of those chairs, and you would turn the dialogue into something like, it would just always sing. Of course, the writing is great, which allowed for that. It could carry the musicality of it. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, so the point is like, I didn't know how to get to you because you were so focused and so deeply, engrossed in that character, where Polito, right, his story was really just right there and wide open. Watching my episode and then watching the later episodes, I realized I didn't like talk to the cast enough because I was too intimidated by them. I had Ned Beatty. And it's like, what am I going to tell Ned Beatty? You're right, and me. Also, the other thing is, early on, I got dinged really early, so I had a scene, and you guys were just like, well, you weren't there yet, Reed, but in the first season, you probably heard all these stories. There was a lot of people leaving the set and slamming doors left and right all the time, and I can't.
It still happened when I got there. We tell these stories all the time.
It was just like everybody was like slamming doors, and then one day I'm with Yaphet Kotto in his office, and he wasn't doing great with the lines. And what he had done is he had put little index cards of the dialogue in different parts of the room. So he'd be moving around the room to get to the lines. And I'm like, Yaphet, and I didn't because I didn't realize he was doing it. I'm like, Yaphet, why are you going over there and standing in the corner when this guy's standing over here? John Polito is standing over here. And he yelled and screamed. I was like, fuck it, I can't take this anymore. I'm leaving. So I walked out and slammed the door behind me. And went, no way, Nick. And went out to the roof. Right? And then I'm standing out there steaming, having a cigarette, and Josh Spring comes out with a football. Right. And tosses it to me. And we tossed the football back and forth a half a dozen times. I'm like, Josh, thank you. That was awesome. And I was ready to go back in. And Yaphet was just kind of steaming, and then he played the rest of the scene with that anger. I mean, that's an old cliche, but he totally all of the anger that he was supposed to give to Polito, was venting from me, and it kind of really helped the scene. And that's a typical Homicide moment where the reality of either the city itself, or the local character, or just the energy between the cast would completely overlap and become something else unto itself on the screen.
Oh, you said it so perfectly.
Perfectly said. That's perfectly said. Also, by the way, Yaphet was over there so that you would get a single of him.
Oh, of course.
Oh, yeah.
He was going into the corners of the carry.
I found that. No, I found that out later. I forget. I think probably it was Jean that told me. Right? It's like he's going to go to the window. Yeah. I'm like, oh yeah, okay.
My first episode with you, he did it in the box because he would always go to the window, or he would do this trick where he wouldn't know his lines, and then you go, okay, you didn't get it in the master, whatever the shot we were doing. We'll have to do a single on you, and then he'd be word perfect. No. And I did the exact same thing that you did. That's why it cracked me up. It was always Melissa and Yaphet who would storm off to their trailers, and I'd just be I'm the only actor standing there on the set. And so one day, I just for a joke, I stormed off and went to my trailer, and they had no idea what to do.
Oh, because you were the nice guy. You were the innocent. You're the bushy-tailed kid from New York, the theater kid from New York. Yeah.
First of all, you've summed up everything that we think about Homicide, and the reason we're doing this, because everyone got dinged by this, and everyone, the reason it was such an incredible creative experience for all of us, but also traumatic. Oh, yeah. Right? And it's so funny to hear that you were intimidated, because I started my first day, and you did my second episode. I was 28. I turned 28 the day I showed up. I was so intimidated by you, because I was like, oh my God, I've laws of gravity, and it seems like you're part of this thing. And it's so neat to because I think that's part of the fuel that we all have anyway as actors and directors, that fear is important. But it's great to hear you say that, because I had no inkling that was going on. And is that did you bring on Edie and Paul to your first episode?
I mean, the thing is,
backup?
That's just like Tom was okay with that, because it was really sort of a student film environment where it's like, so Tom, I got these guys, I got Edie over here that I worked with, and I've got Paul Schulze over here, and I got my Eli Cabilio, who was also my lawyer, to play a little role that Kyle had a little interaction with. And they're like, sure, bring him on down. I mean, it was really, he had that. The thing that Fontana had is that he really wanted you to bring your best or fail. right? That was his thing. He wasn't, I mean, at least I never felt like he really, sort of like nickeled and dimed me at all. I never really felt like I was like being watched or, it really felt like he just like wanted to trust you. I mean, he would give me shit all the time about all the stupid moves I would make.
Of course.
And what an idiot I was. But I mean, he certainly, in the end, he would always call me after the episode and say, listen, I know I give you a lot of shit, but, you did a good job. I'm like, oh, thank you, Tom. That's nice.
If I ever had a big emotional scene and Tom was on set, right before the take, he'd be like, don't fuck it up. He said every single time.
That's just what you want to hear. But you knew he had confidence in you, right? He knew that you weren't going.
Oh,
yeah,
I loved it. I loved that because that was sort of the attitude, the tenor of the set was that it was competitive and jaunty, and it felt like you were in a Homicide Squad room. So only someone who had great affection for you would say, "Don't fuck it up" before your important take. I took it as it was actually inspiring. Yeah. But I mean, you said it so well too. Is all of that madness? Just you're telling that Jaffa story. All the madness would always get incorporated into the scene. You had this great quote. We both were little good students. We read this great interview you did with Hal Hartley. You said something really cool about the accident. That it's allowing accidents to happen. It's all about the mistake and chaos. And that's my philosophy. I mean, I think I only act for the accident, for the mistake, because the mistake is the magic. But I love. That's what you brought to it, because this isn't hyperbole. I mean, there is no homicide. Clearly, we've just learned that you kind of gave them the template for how to shoot
I think they knew what they were going for, and then there was a coincidence that a movie had come along that sort of had just done that, and it applied certain rules and principles. Because it's totally fake. You would just apply certain rules and principles to the photographic and editing style that people will recognize as a documentary, overlapping dialogue and all that kind of stuff. So that was really it was a complete conceit, right? And the show just had to sort of like, oh, okay, this is a conceit and a dogma that we can. But they also went much further with the sort of like the triple jump cuts and And I remember, Kyle, you directed 3 episodes.
No,
you did 3.
3. So I'm well behind
you. But
you
did an episode that had a car chase.
Oh gosh.
And you had an episode that had a musical montage. And I was so jealous of like, oh, he's using all these sort of like great cinematic.
That was one of those things Tom called me about and said, we're not using
What
that.
do you mean?
I did a Keystone Cop thing. I had Jean get a special camera that flipped things upside down. So the car was passing in front of the camera like 3 times going in different directions and stuff. And they ended up using a little bit of it, but like it was, I'll show them, I'll change the rules of this entire game. And Tom said, you're not.
Well, you're not going to be, you're not the first TV director whose interesting shots get cut out by envious others, believe me. But it was Steve Allen, right?
Yeah,
because it was the story. Yeah. It was that great story of Richard Opel or whatever that ended up going into Magnolia as well. The suicide interrupted by the shotgun blast, which was a true thing that wasn't talked about until like '94. And Overmyer, I had an Overmyer script as well. As great as everybody was, there was something magical about the Overmyer scripts, and I don't know 100%. Exactly what that was, because I had Saigon Rose, which he wrote, which was like a deeply impactful episode for me, and it really sort of like helped me understand just more and more about sort of like the process of working with deep tragedy and how to sort of like explore those sort of themes.
It's pretty interesting to have you here, because I'd watched Fire Part 2 last night, because we haven't had someone who had worked with Reed yet, and Reed is like the first 3 seasons he's not in,
because we're doing a rewatch podcast.
Episode by episode. We're doing a rewatch. Fire 2 was so assured. What you did, like as a director, I thought and that was only your 2nd episode. So something had happened between that first episode and that second episode's 3 years later, either with the work you had done in between or a combination of you had a better, maybe not a better script, but a script that was more.
And he had Jean.
Yeah, and he had Jean.
So by the time I'd gotten to Fire, I'd already made a second feature. Right, and some of the basic, because when I made my first movie, I was not a cinephile. I was really just a guy with a gimmick. So I had to then go to film school and learn, and so I did. I watched, finally started watching movies, paying a lot of attention to sort of like tone, structure, photography, lenses. The expressivity of focus and how to use focus, and the expressivity of different kinds of lens choices, and not just being like it's got to look like a documentary, right? Finding ways of being more cinematic. And so breaking all the rules in that episode, I'm having big wide masters and big group shots, shooting things in a more sort of traditional way, because I also just felt like it was important for me to learn, you know, because for me, television was the great workout place, was the great gymnasium of trying out different kinds of techniques and trying to learn different things. So by the time I got to Fire Part 2, I had learned a little bit, and I was hungry to learn more and hungry to try different things. Like I remember there was some scenes that I covered mostly in a profile. And it was a little self-indulgent on me, because I wasn't necessarily thinking about what the moment of this interview was. I was thinking to myself, gee, it would be interesting to see what this would look like in a profile. And then I realized that as I'm cutting it together, I'm like, fuck, I wasn't paying attention to the landing these moments.
It seems like that was a part of just your continuing kind of education and how you were kind of gaining more of a vocabulary in terms of how to use certain shots and stuff like that. And like you said,
yeah, but don't you like coming away from a project having really learned something? You know what I mean?
That's what Homicide was for me. That was my TV training ground, my crucible with a camera, because I was much more comfortable on the stage up to that point. It was trial by fire, and fortunately, obviously, it's handheld, so it was a great environment with no marks, a great environment to learn how to act for the camera. But I felt the same way. It was my gym and my training ground. I learned pretty much everything on that set.
The interrogation scene with the arsonist,
with Adam Tracy.
I thought it was an amazing scene. The moving back and forth from that into the room where G was, and the way that Adam was, you know, working it, and the way that Reed was working it was just incredible. And then, but just the way you shot that was so tight. It was so good. And I felt like, wow, that's someone who's made a big leap into
that
doing
is so nice of you
like
to say
that.
so. And the simple answer is, well, I started watching Hitchcock. So the psychology of the frame and the importance of like how, where you place a camera in relation to the subject and what the thinking is and the power you're trying to either take away from them or provide to them. He was very adept at using the psychology of a frame to really sort of like create character, even if it's just a still moment. You know, but Tom Fontana gave me a lot of shit about that. He was bugging me about that scene because he felt like, I'm like, why are you doing another shot over here? Why are you doing another take over here? Why are you doing this? I'm like, because it's important. For me, I mean, I was arguing a little bit because he's now relating to someone else is bringing something else up, and I want to make sure that when he turns to him, I'm looking at his eyes and understanding what, you know, the disdain that this Tracy character has for everybody in the room around him, because that was sort of like the central sort of theme was that sort of the disdain that he had and mistrust that he had of all of you people, not mistrust, but whatever. But anyway, so that's what I was trying to build. I was trying to build something that had a kind of a Hitchcock-like suspense in that, and I think Fontana thought it was too filmy.
Oh,
I can't remember exactly, because I remember I was talking to Adam Tracy about it. Adam Tracy was reminding me, but I don't have any firsthand memory of it.
What I remember about that scene with Adam was he's like, I don't think my character would get fooled. When I was supposed to trip him up. When I go, why the dog died? And, I didn't know there were any dogs. And he's like, no, I don't think I would say that. And I was like, I get that. I was like, I get that, but it's kind of like, I think it's
pretty central.
To the event of the scene and the rest of... But it was pretty funny because there was a moment where I don't know if we're going to do this.
Oh, really? It's interesting. So I don't remember. Yeah, so there was a moment where Tracy was giving us the most flack. Oh, that's interesting. It happens to be a lot on set where I get this kind of like hyper-focus. And sometimes things that are around me, I kind of forget about it. I notice that I kind of go and I don't know if you guys have that with like your experience as an actor. Like, do you remember every like moment that you have on set, or do you?
None, almost none of them. Yeah,
that's why we're doing this rewatch podcast to kind of get it all back.
Yeah, because Adam was telling me that there was some moment, and he was blaming Fontana, but you're now thinking that it was actually him. Okay, well, good. There you go.
Trust me, you know, it's always seen through the filter. That's my second episode. I haven't really said this much yet on this podcast, but I've discussed before that no one was excited to see me there from the cast. Like when I joined the cast, no one was overly excited that I was joining. So which I love, because it was like sort of a trial by fire, and I felt that that's what my character would go through, that he wasn't going to be welcomed with open arms. But I remember Adam's like, I wouldn't be fooled by that. And I thought, and then I knew you guys were friends. Like, I wonder if Nick's going to side with them. I wonder if this is the end of Mike Kellerman in this one scene. But
Nick was going to hand you that envelope that had some lines on it that said, listen.
You know, it's so interesting, because I want to go back to that a little bit, because I was thinking about this when I was rewatching Fire Part 2, because because your character landed with such antagonism, right? I mean, you were just giving Pimpleton shit long. You know what I like? I like, salmon fishing and a glass of bourbon, and I'm in your face, and then I'm going to be in another scene later be in your face and circle around you and be in your face, I was wondering, this guy is because he's going to get. What's the word that they used to use for officers in Vietnam when they were killed by their soldiers? Yeah, this guy's going to get fragged.
Yeah.
Because he's really coming off hot. Because I didn't know enough to ask, because we didn't have tone meetings,
Right,
so I didn't know enough to ask where this was coming from, where your antagonism was coming from, where the anger, what it was. Because I know that you turned down the job, and then I was just trying to figure out I didn't understand what that level they were trying to achieve was. Were you put there as someone that they were all going to somehow snuff? What do you think about that?
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't even thought of that. No, I think it was described to me probably that you could go toe-to-toe with him, that you were as good a cop, except that inside he felt insecure, right? So
you had to
because I was wondering,
right? Okay,
that's so funny that you brought that up, because I rewatched it last night as well, and I thought, did Nick tell me to get in his face? Did someone else tell me to get in his face? Did I have that instinct to get into his face? I couldn't really remember how it all transpired, but it's interesting, too, because I watched all the episodes that you directed, and almost the majority of my favorite scenes from my entire time on the show were with you as a director. and now I assumed, of course, because I'm saying I was so insecure that first, I was like, oh, Nick must hate me and think I'm a terrible actor. So I'm sure for all of Fire Part 2, I was just I'm just disappointing Nick, left, right, and center. But I remember when you came back season 6, you came back 3 times, oh God, Nick's coming. This is so exciting, and we'd always have those fun things. But that Fire Part 2, it is. Kyle's right. It's so masterfully directed, and it's so solid, and
thank you.
All the performances.
And what I'll say also is is that Nick, it's like the stuff that you did in Laws of Gravity, where you and you said it on here, where I want to hone in on what the truth is of it.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like Laws of Gravity. Some of those scenes, I was just going, "Fuck! I've got to get out of this room. This is it's too much." And that thing with Reed circling Andre and getting in his face, I had that same feeling, that visceral, leave him alone. Come on, man. But it was we needed to go in there with him, because then the payoff is, one of the payoffs is in the interrogation room, where we see how smart, and then the other payoff is with his father.
Which was really,
to me,
that scene was,
the
scene with the father was, which I completely forgotten about.
That's my favorite scene that I ever shot on Homicide. That is my absolute favorite scene.
It was so unique, and it just because it landed the character completely, right? And just here you were trying to make the connection, and Dad was just gone. And and with that distance, it's that hole that you're now trying to fill as a person in the world, right? So that's when it all made sense.
Yeah,
that's when it all kind of came together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That answers the question of what you said of where does his antagonism come on. For me, it's like a father who says, "I didn't try," and what does he say, Reed? What does he?
I never did anything that I wasn't good at.
My favorite gesture in that scene, actually, Reed, is that when you helped him with the bottles. That was, because I really do. I think it's those little moments. I think that was the first time I felt like, as an audience member, I now had access to you. Right? Prior to
it's
that,
funny because I feel like we worked that
subtle,
out together.
Yeah,
perhaps.
I feel like I bet we worked that out together, because it was a magical moment. And then, unfortunately, you probably looked at the DVDs, but now on Peacock, there's a very iconic song that I always associate with Mike Kellerman that didn't make it to Peacock from that scene, the live song "I Alone."
Yeah, I noticed that the music was different, because I don't think it kills anything, but there is a dissonance.
No.
Period-wise, because it feels like some of the new cues are more contemporary, and that's the only thing that kind of okay.
It seems like it puts a nail on some of the stuff. Like I noticed in something with Melissa going in to do the test.
That song was really important in the original episode, and it really it seemed some songs help and some songs don't.
Was that the same song? Was that the same song in the original? No. Yeah, because that's the song that they put in was like, we're following her along to do this test, and it's going to be kind of fun. Right. Oh, where's
some fabulous music supervisor over at NBC Universal, made their money that day. So there you go.
Yep. And we love NBC and
Oh my
Peacock
gosh.
for this. Well, Reed and I have often talked about how dysfunctional our setup was and how fucked up things were, and the people slamming doors and all this stuff. But I was looking at Laws of Gravity, and I was looking at some of the actors on there, and I thought, my God, in a way, I was wondering if you came and it's a bigger production, but it's almost like this dysfunction was child's play. Had you come from that already?
Dysfunction is what all of my movies are about. A dysfunctional. I've made 4 features. I wrote them all, and they're all the same story. And it's all about a dysfunctional family. And I'm an only child, so I dream of the dysfunctional family. So right, so that's me living the dream. So in Laws of Gravity, we had open fist fights between the 2 leads early on, which led me to believe that the whole project was going to go down the drain. But because we more or less shot in order, the desperation between my 2 leads and the animosities that they had towards each other because of lifestyle choices played all the way through the movie.
Yes.
Edie Falco and Peter Green, after a long rehearsal, had developed a love affair. So all of these sort of elements had become. When we were out there shooting, we were always in character. There were no trailers. Everybody just sat around on apple boxes. So no one was ever out of character. When certain actors would get in a car and drive off at night, we often didn't know if they were going to come back the next day because of their lifestyle choices, and all of that sort of folded into what that movie was.
Well, that's exactly
what Homicide was, right? I mean, it's exactly because it is a dysfunctional family, and because you guys are all isolated, you're on location. It was like the longest apocalypse now ever. Because you guys are all in the jungle together. 100 days, that's nothing.
You said it so perfectly, because that's exactly it. And when if you were the poor director who showed up for episode 20, good luck.
I know, but that's where you guys came in, right? Because that's where the cast started directing, and and also one thing that I noticed about your episode is how relaxed the cast was, Kyle. And I think that's the same of every time a cast member is directing. It's you really get a sense that everybody's feeling just a little bit more relaxed, and they're just a little bit more playful, and they're having a little bit of a better time. And I hope that's the way you experienced it.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I raised my hand to Tom and said I'd like to direct an episode, because we had a couple of episodes that was just massive strain and stress, and I thought I can at least throw a better party, and that's the only reason why I did it, because I knew far less than any director who ever showed up on.
But you had a very strong visual style going.
I'd watched a lot of Natural Born Killers or something. I don't know. And
who directed first, Clark or you? Who was the first cast member? Clark.
Yeah. He had directed one. He directed one the season before, but he was directing 2 or 3 episodes before me. So he was the guy that I shadowed.
Oh, great.
And then after Kyle got to direct, I asked Tom, and he's like, no, there's 2 actors directing. You can't direct.
It's too much.
I was denied.
Really?
Yeah, I asked him. I was because I'd wanted to direct, and I thought, okay. He's like, no. Kyle and Clark.
Well, the floodgates would have opened then, and that's what goes on now.
Yeah.
Because by the time a show gets into a second season, it's well, the DP's got to get one. A couple of the cast members got to get one. It's become the thing that everybody wants to do now.
Right? They let Yaphet write a couple. That's all I have to say about that.
That's all we have to say.
I did not. Are you telling the truth? I did not know that.
Yes.
Yeah. He wrote, and I knew he had written one, but then I looked back and it said that he had written 2 of them.
Right. I mean, Yaphet is a man unto itself. I mean, I remember. This is something. Reed, you had done, because I remember working with you. With him, I think it was when we were outside shooting the fire stuff, and you were talking to him about because this is something that I never did, because I was afraid that I would get the facts wrong. You were talking to him about his prior work. You were. I think you did that. I feel like you guys are talking a lot about some of the stuff you'd seen with him, and of course, I knew him from across, all the way back, 110th Street, Alien, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I always was reluctant to talk to actors about their past, because I always feel like I would get some factoid wrong.
Yaphet and I got along great because of how I talked to him on that episode. I told him he was my favorite Bond villain. And because he was my first Bond villain, I told him he was my favorite Bond villain, and I just talked about how much I loved him in Across 110th Street, how much I loved him in the Star Chamber, and that was it. Because the quickest way to Yaphet's heart was a little praise. And we were in good shape. But yeah, I was a huge fan of his. He was one of my acting heroes, as was Ned and John. Polito wasn't there, obviously, when I got there. But yeah, it actually smoothed the
for
way
me too, because he was a
the rest of the time I
sweetheart.
there.
He was a sweetheart that entire episode to me. He was just because he was so happy. He was so alive in his in the revelry of who he was that he would just walk into the room so full of himself that he was just a breeze. And okay, so that's the key. That's what he needs. And some actors do. Some actors just need that.
Well, another key that I found, the other key that I found out for about Yaphet was to give him the take where he gets to dictate exactly how he plays it. You just give him that take, put the camera right on him, and if he gets that, he's as happy.
I didn't learn that until season 7. When he had to basically carry an episode, the La Familia episode that was basically his, and that's when I learned, finally, because listening takes a while, because there's an expectation of a director: show up and have an answer, and show up and know what to do, and show up and otherwise, even if you don't, and I've learned that I find that I get along better with people when I tell them I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, because they're just like, okay, all right, great, you're one of us. So it kind of works.
Nick, here's a question I want to ask you, this is me breaking out from just conversation to a formed question.
Ooh.
Here we go.
Get your number 2 pencil ready.
Yeah. So look, it's about the thing about you enlarging your vocabulary, like from Brotherhood to Daredevil, from Sopranos to Supergirl, from Ray Donovan to the Titans. What do you feel is your wheelhouse? What's the difference from moving to something that feels more grounded to you to these kind of hyper realities? And is that I just want the next job, or is it I want to learn more about the vocabulary of how to do science fiction or whatever it is? And what have you gained from that, would you say?
Well,
or have you seen it as being any kind of shift?
No, it's an intentional yearning to be challenged and to try different things, right?
Right.
Because you can, there is a way of finding yourself like on a long-running show and just going back to that all the time. There's an ease to that. You can pick up bad habits. I think that like I really wanted to sort of like always try to do something that I've never thought about before. Thinking, like I am not a person that is into comic books at all, right? I was never that kind of kid, right? So, but then for me to do something like a Supergirl, where you're steeped in a mythology and a history and a way of thinking about characters, and it was a big leap for me to sort of like get into that without having to think about like sort of like what a person is thinking in the room right now with the person that's sitting across the table from them. Because you have to bring in the sort of like the whole history, who this character is in sort of like the history of their entertainment value, and that was really interesting for me. And also just working with visual effects and like listening to people about how to do that, how to approach that, what to think about those kinds of things, and then also just trying out different, like, a lot of those fights, a lot of those scenes had like these like intense kind of fight scenes that included visual effects. And I think that anytime you're a director, or if you're working in industrial arts, right, you want to stretch your abilities a little bit, and you want to try different things. And sometimes you can learn, hey, I like that, or sometimes that wasn't really for me. Anybody especially if you work in entertainment, you can get typecast, in a certain way. You can get typecast as the guys going to do a certain kind of project, and that why call them for this, because all they've been doing is that. I think it's very important to sort of always sort of like try to sprinkle different kinds of experiences onto your resume and not just sort of do the same thing. Part of it's the creative challenges of it and the growth and what you learn from that, and also just the sort of like the practicalities of the industry and how the thinking goes behind the hiring of you as a freelancer. Right? They want to know that you've done something before, even if it's like worked with a cast member, even if it knows that you work with like a sort of like high level, or complicated cast members. Like if they see that you've worked with like actors that are known as complicated, they feel more comfortable bringing you in on something where the cast is more challenging.
Do you have any interest in doing a film again?
I'm always writing. So, and that in some ways, that's just for me to see the movie that I write, because I'm not, my instincts are not commercial. So sometimes I just kind of like, will write some sort of version of some, corner of obscure history, just because it would be kind of interesting to sort of like do the research and delve into that project. But long form stuff, I've done cable movies, and long form is always really kind of interesting to me, but there's a limit. I couldn't spend 3 years working on one project. Like, I've always been punk rock. I like landing and like working fast, loud songs. I really like working that way.
It's so funny. That's what I thought you did. That's what Laws of Gravity was. You were bringing, every 20 years or so, you need punk rock, or, they called it grunge in the 90s. You need to get back to what really matters and keep it 3 chords in the truth. And that's what you do. And I love that. Because that's what's exciting, and that's what's vibrant, and that's what we want in our art. I mean, thank God they stole your idea and made Homicide and brought you on.
But also there's something about, it's interesting about like sort of like the time spent. Also, there's also, for me, a little bit, it's kind of like the intimacy thing, right? It's like when I spend like a lot of time with people, I kind of need to take a break. It's a little bit because of the only child in me, a little bit. So it's like for me to sort of like parachute in and work on something fast. It's like the longest movie that I did was, New Jersey Drive, and that was, or Drowning Mother. It was like 30 days, right? So that's 30 days is a good amount of time for me to work on one particular project and then go into post. That ends up being a year, right, of my life. Because, I don't know if I have the kind of like the intense focus to do something and work on it for years and years and years, writing it and developing it and bringing it to fruition, and then finally getting it up there, and then having the preview screenings, and then all of that kind of stuff, and all the struggle, and then all of that either lives and dies at 7:15 on that first Friday night, right? Right. Yes. You know what I mean? Right. It's like, and everybody that's working with you, their careers live and die depending on the success of this movie. You know what I mean? That's a very tough thing to carry, and that's not why I got into the arts. Right? Is to sort of like I like landing in a room, working with some great actors, having fun, talking to a cameraman, talking to the dolly grips, whatever it is. All of that, where the rubber meets the road stuff, is really what I live for. That's what's the most exciting.
Yeah,
as an only child, I feel the exact same way. That's why I didn't want to stay in the theater. I was like, I can't do the same play for a year.
That's so interesting.
I'll go insane.
I didn't realize you were an only. Yeah, us New Yorkers. Yeah, a lot of us. Yeah.
It's really funny. No, I love that you framed it that way, because it's so true. Because I have the same thing. I'm like, I like that social contact that you get while you're on set, but then I need to be left alone. So I'm glad it's only for 10 days or 30 days, and then I feel the exact same way.
But you and Belzer, right? You guys were you guys were like two peas in a pod, right? I just remember you guys hanging out, like, because we did the baseball episode together. Right, and you guys were just
one of my most favorite of all time.
It's so funny. It's so that's what made some people who were very important in who had a role in the creating of the show. We were scouting the Oriole Stadium. I don't even know what it's called, the baseball stadium there. Camden thank you so much. So this is why I got into trouble.
Yeah.
So at Camden Yards, there's a big yellow tower in the middle there, and I'm like, why is there this large yellow tower in the middle of my shot? And so these two very important creators of the show, who would not miss an opportunity to go to Camden Yards, of course, during our scout, turned to me and like, you complete fucking idiot. Because I was not a baseball guy. I did not care. Right. I was never into baseball. And for me to sort of like say the stupidest thing about the cherished grounds of Camden Yard just made them like, you are so dead to me right now, Mr. Nick Gomez. It was the funniest thing. That episode had some really like cool long takes and things like that. I was really kind of like, it was fun to see that again. I hadn't thought about. I almost forgot about it actually.
It's so funny.
What was the name of the episode, Reed?
That one, it's part of that 3-parter. So it was Blood Ties Part 2.
Right.
And Nick, it's so funny because I was so in love with you, and I can just tell. I looked at those long takes, but I could also tell just from my demeanor and Belzer's demeanor that how comfortable and happy we were that you were there. You can feel it. I can feel the difference. I know who this is the director based on how. So you gave us this space, and these scenes had all of this life. I remember I pitched you grabbing the guy by the ear, and you're like, go for it. Because I'd seen some cop do it or something like that. I'm just going to grab him by the ear. And you're like, yeah. And it just had, these scenes had this realism and this playfulness to them that I think we share the same aesthetic. And I could just see how grounded and playful and calm everyone is, and those shots were amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, you got so much.
Thank you so much. You know, because
Yeah.
it's interesting because that was one of them. Also, you know, has Homicide progressed, the episodes became more Baroque in their stories often,
Yes.
right? And that was kind of one of the more Baroque episodes. And it needed you two guys to kind of ground it, and also those great guys that we had in the stands. Those cast members, those guys were just amazing.
So great.
But thank you. That's really because it's interesting because that was, by the time I got there for that episode, I was really more assured in my sort of like knowing how to sort of work with lenses and work with a crew effectively and sort of like how to use a location effectively and how to sort of like, you know, I don't think that 3 years prior to that I could have evoked the stadium quite as much as I did or even to cheat the way that we did. I wouldn't have like understood the tricks involved.
Every time you came back, that's what I felt is that you had taken leaps.
Oh.
I remember the first time you showed up, I went, that's a Homicide director.
Yeah.
That's who we need. And then that first episode was like kind of like, well, okay, we're finding this thing out, and you know. And then you came back those 3 years later, and I went, bam. And every time you came back, and like that season you did those 3 episodes, I was as happy as could be that you were on the list.
Wow.
Always, because you
Always.
always brought something new, and there was a growth.
That's
And it's so cool to see that over a period.
It's so nice to hear because the thing is,
rare.
we traveling, journeyman directors get so little sort of feedback along the way, and that's part and parcel of that.
Yeah.
It's being the sort of like, when you're nomadic, like a journeyman director and you're freelancer, you're sort of on the next thing very often, right? And you sort of you build up a little bit of a protection, I think sometimes. And I'm not great at like keeping in touch with people, and I'm not that effusive. And you don't often hear that what your experience was like. I just assume that I did okay, and then the next guy comes along, they do just as well as you do, and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice to hear that.
Everyone I know from Homicide, when your name is brought up, there's just a sense of really love for you.
Oh,
Absolutely.
wow, that's so
Yeah.
nice.
But
Yeah.
it's great to hear this perspective because that's
Yeah.
part of the reason I think we're doing this is because this all sort of takes up some real estate in our brains, this project, this Homicide. And it's nice to hear, because everyone seems so confident, so it's nice to hear everyone's vulnerabilities and showing some of the more sensitive underbelly sides of themselves, because it's true. Like, we loved you. We were always excited, and you're tied for third in the most episodes of directing the show.
I have a memory that Jeff Gordon had sent to me. I said, tell me what you remember of Nick. And he said, well, here's this one very clear memory. We were out and we were shooting on a highway that was going nowhere. It was the
That's right.
highway to nowhere. And he said, and all of a sudden, Nick's dog leapt onto Martin Luther King Parkway. And you guys thought, oh my God, the dog obviously must have been hit.
So the highway
leap.
was divided into two, and there was a grass island betwixt the two of them. This dead highway. So Trouble, the dog, was used to jumping up onto the grassy thing and then jumping down again, not realizing that on the next level, that if I jump up over the thing, there's actually going to be an edge down. So Trouble jumped over, went down whatever it was about maybe 25 feet, something like that, onto a grassy knoll that was down below, where Lulu Williamson, if you remember her from the art department, was down there like waiting at the light in her Jeep. And I looked over the edge thinking my dog was dead. Lulu knew my dog, and she looked up to me and said, Nick, why is your dog down here? And the dog was fine. The dog was a little spooked, but yeah, the dog was fine. That was the day. That was the time that we had to create this car crash. And the genius way that Finnerty had come up to do this was to tow it with a cable, so the car could then crash into the parked truck. Not thinking that since there was nobody behind the wheel of the car that was supposed to hit the truck, that it wouldn't obey the cable, that it would just go off and do that. So this thing, here we are all set, and all of our vehicles were all parked over here, the crew vehicles. So this vehicle is coming along, and it overtakes the cable, and then just keeps on going. And one guy in the crew, I can't remember who it was, is electric, and it goes and it hits this car, and the electric goes, "That's my fucking car!" It was so bad. It was so bad. But yeah, so that was an episode full of. That was the episode where Cox was fired. That was a really big episode for me because there was a lot of real. She really brought it for me. She hated working with me, but she really brought it in that episode. I don't know if she hated working with me, but she just was kind of prickly with me. But there was prickly. But there was a lot. Yeah, because you had the last scene with her in the bar, right? Yeah. She. But that was a really intense. Because we were doing that. We were covering those scenes, like her firing scene, and a lot of long takes, just sort of like staying with her. And she really she has that special sort of defensive quality. And we were able to sort of like crack it just for a second to show just like a little bit of vulnerability. But yeah, my dog jumped off the highway. But it was listen. There's not many shows that would allow you to bring your dog to hang around, right? That was the great thing. Yeah. And see, the thing about Homicide that was so unique. I mean, of course, there's Baltimore, and then you've got this crew of people all working together on these very intense, very confrontational, emotional shows, episode after episode, week after week, and you're all hanging together. Everybody's eating together, hanging out. Everybody's partying together. That's a very unique condition to the world of contemporary entertainment.
Yes.
Right, in this kind of medium, where you literally sort of are in this compound working together like that, and that's going to be a life altering or deeply life impacting experience for all you guys, right? Because that's got to be.
That's why we're doing this.
It's got to be so intense. It's like going to war together. Who forgets that? It's almost like if you guys decided to have a reunion every year at some VFW, it would make perfect sense. Because not only is all of this stuff, there's also all the PTSD that's going on behind it, right? All of us are broken 100%. One way or another by our impact with the show. I mean, we're all blessed to have been in the same well with all these creative people, but there's something about the show, its power and its energy when you were there on the set, negative or positive, it's going to adjust you.
Yeah.
Somehow, and if you're there, and you guys were there day after day after day, 12 hours a day. I can't even imagine what that's like. Just in your presence and how you move through the world. It's gotta be all of you now, right? It's got to be something where it's all part of you and it's never gone away.
Yeah. Oh my God, Nick, you've said everything better than we could have said it. We're going to close on that one because that's it.
Beautiful.
That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And it's funny that you just said, because we're going to have a reunion, which we'd like you to come to. It's so funny that you said that about veterans because I've never gone to any of my high school reunions. This will be the first reunion that I ever go to, and because it has that impact that you said so beautifully.
Can you imagine? I just can't imagine everybody being in the same room again, Let's see who doesn't show up. That'll be interesting.
Yeah, that will be interesting.
Yeah.
This is the most fun I've had on a Friday before 6 p.m. in my entire life. So thank you so much, you guys. Really.
Well, that was amazing.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Man. Yeah.
If you're new to this podcast and you were tuning in for just your grandmother's rewatch podcast, this is not it.
We're going to give you some dysfunction and some art.
Oh, I just love talking to him. There's not really much more to say. He captured it so brilliantly.
Beautifully. Like a bit of an outsider's view of it all.
It's funny because I just had this instinct rewatching Laws of Gravity, which we shamefully just watched this week, that iconic movie. And I thought, oh, wow, he's really influenced it. But I didn't realize he really influenced it. They basically
had the meeting in the cafe.
They picked his brain.
Completely. Thank God they gave him episodes after that.
I didn't want to interrupt our amazing guest, but that's what makes this show so amazing. So you're bringing in feature directors direct on television, which has never happened. They're emulating this new wave of independent cinema that's emerging in the 90s. And then they bring the guy on to direct episode number 4, and he's never directed anything but his own movie once. That's amazing. And that's Homicide.
Yeah. And thank God for Tom having the trust and the faith to do something like that with someone who had never done TV before.
Thank God for Tom.
Thank God for Tom.
Oh, buddy.
And Jim Finnerty.
And Jim Finnerty. He's like, no, Dolly. He's just...
Yeah, we're on. Yeah. Wait, do we need actors? We're gonna...
Can't we just put him in different clothes? That was fantastic. Well, there's really nothing more to say, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity if there was anything we missed or anything that stood out in the episode for you that you wanted to discuss.
Yeah, it was interesting. You know, last night you had mentioned something about Andre and I, and that was the episode where he says, "Hey, you don't have the mind of a criminal."
Right.
That was that incredible conversation in the car that really has stayed with a lot of people. Like Nick was talking about, you know, shooting over the shoulder, from Andre's kind of point of view with me smoking with the Rubik's Cube.
The only thing I wanted to say is I thought your scenes with Andre, the two of you, it was the heart of this episode, and it was brilliant. And I think it's important to remember that we're only on episode 4, and shows take a while to find their way. Yeah. And this show is still figuring out who it is. I mean, as we remember the week before, which they didn't let them air, they made a play, which for episode number 3. And then for this one,
incredible.
It has these scenes that have a different tone to them. The thing that keeps me going through this, the heart of this, the grounding of this episode is your scenes with Andre, the two of you, Frank and Tim, and they're beautiful and they're powerful. They seem like things we'd never seen on television. When you guys are going and doing the search at the house and you're knocking the door down and looking at suspects, that feels real. And that conversation you have in the car is one of the greatest moments of television, where he says how he looks at the street and you don't have the mind of a criminal, and you guys establishing in such an intelligent and clear way where your differences lie.
By the way, and you said it before, you said we were kind of learning as we were figuring out what this was. That was Yash's first episode writing.
Right.
And you can tell it's an up and down episode in terms of like it's heavy on exposition. But then he's got these incredible moments like that he's written into it. And you look at it, you go, I want to see more of what this guy has up his sleeve.
As time goes on, he tends to focus on one story. His episodes seem to be, obviously, most famously the subway episode. And so as Nick is learning his way as a director, which is surprising and wonderful to hear that honesty and that vulnerability, Yash is finding his way as a writer for television. Because there's still a lot of theater in it that you can feel. You can hear the playwright still in this episode.
There's still that guy leaning up against the locker, smoking a cigarette, going out to high schools.
That's right. Well, buddy, this was amazing.
Great time.
Great time. Thank you so much. As always, everybody, you're listening to Homicide Life on Repeat, the Homicide Life on the Street rewatch podcast. And I am here with the great and powerful Kyle Secor, and we will be here again next week. And you can find us on all the socials. We're at Homicide LOR, at Homicide LOR, because we're not going to make you spell it out. So we're on all those things. Thank you for being here, Kyle. I love you, man.
Thank you, Reed. You're the best, man.
You're the best. All right, buddy.
Appreciate it.
See you guys next week.
Okay, man.